So it's 10:03, which means we can start. So welcome everybody. Jim Schulman, your vice mayor, and I'm here with council member Kyonzte Toombs, who this year is the chairman of our budget committee for the Metro Council. So Kyonzte, welcome again. I'm really glad that you decided to do this, or that I forced you into doing it and that you agreed to do it anyway. So let me tell you a couple things first. We usually start with COVID numbers. The numbers from yesterday to today, increase of 166 cases. We're at 27,927, 258 deaths. We're watching those numbers obviously really carefully. The mayor has made some announcements about going to phase 3. Made some announcements about people going to the Titans games, and I know that they're working on a number of different things, increased capacity at the bars, and I think they're also taking a look at how we deal with the city center, which is so all that is positive news. Obviously, just everyone remember to stay safe, so we can keep opening things back up. A couple people on the call today. We have Councilmember John Rutherford is on the call, and Councilmember Gloria Hauser. So they were smart. They're listening to the budget chair. Always a good thing to do. County Clerk Brenda Wynn is on the phone. We have our fiscal director Kevin Crumbo is watching, and the state comptroller who came before the Metro Council the other night, Justin Wilson, is also on the call as well. And two last things before we get into the conversation. We are recognizing and celebrating Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year. So we know some people probably aren't on the call today, but just wanted to recognize that it's Rosh Hashanah. And also very sad this morning, last night, to hear of the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was an inspiration to many of us. I know people may always have different opinions, but that's a national leader. Anytime we lose a Supreme Court justice in this country, we should recognize that. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away last night. After, I obviously don't know all the details, but obviously she's been sick, and such a strong individual. What a strong lady. So anyway, Councilmember Toombs, welcome. Just for people who may not know who you are, and they will probably know you a lot better at the end of this year than they may know you right now. But tell the viewers just a little bit about yourself. You know, where are you from? What do you do? That type of thing.
Okay. So I am originally from a small town in Louisiana called Hammond, Louisiana, about 25,000 people. Spent all my elementary school years there. Went to middle and high school actually right outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in Decatur, Georgia. Came from Decatur to Vanderbilt in '97, the fall of '97. Stayed at Vanderbilt for law school. And I've pretty much been in Nashville since then. I did take a little 1.5-year hiatus. I went back to school, went to Emory and got an MBA. But other than that, I've been in Nashville. I'm an attorney, obviously. I'm married, have 4 children. I have a 21-year-old bonus daughter, and then I have some little ones who are 8, 6, and recently turned 5. Been married for almost 10 years. Really active in the community before I ran for council, and council was a way to continue my public service. So I ran, and here I am.
So let me ask you this, with a lot of young kids being at home, how are you doing that? So I remember when I first ran for council, I think my wife said, no, you're not running for anything until the kids get older. So I will tell the viewing audience this. We had this was a late night meeting. Well, all our council meetings run late. Excuse me, but this was about 3 weeks ago. And we were up late, and I heard some commotion on the meeting, and I could hear kids running around, and I was like, whose kids are up this late? and then I realized it was yours. So tell me a little bit about how you're dealing from a family standpoint with COVID, with the pandemic, trying to work and trying to do this council stuff at the same time.
So you have to have a strong support system. So my husband is very supportive, has always been, you know, when I was campaigning and not home a lot, he did everything with the children, and he still does the same, so that I can balance work and council. And he works, but, you know, tries to work around what I do. It helps to have a very flexible job. I work for the state. As long as I'm getting my work done and getting my hours in, for that job, I can kind of flex my time to do what I need to do for council. And then with COVID and with virtual learning, I had to find a college kid who could help me, because teaching and working at home, teaching your children and working a separate job at home is not a thing. So that's just not possible. So I had to get some help. So I get help. That's how I do it.
I think we all need help. How many? So all three of your kids at home are doing virtual learning at this point?
Mm-hmm. All three. I got pre-K, second grade, and third grade.
All right. Yeah. I only have a grandchild, and she's not at home at my house, so I don't have to worry about that part. I don't know how you do it. I've obviously had discussions with lots of people who are trying to do this, and it's very difficult. So thank you. And just appreciate what you're going through. All right. So tell me, why in the world, with everything else you had going on, did you decide to run for the city council?
So, you know, Nashville has been a booming city over the past several years, and a lot of that boom has really pushed out our native Nashvillians, pushed them out to the outskirts of the county and to other counties, because Nashville is becoming increasingly unaffordable. So in my district, District 2, which is part of North Nashville, Bordeaux, a lot of that area, it was really kind of, I hate to say ripe for the picking, but it's, you know, it's great land over there. You have the river views, the views of downtown. You're about 10 minutes away from downtown. So I knew the developers were coming. I mean, it makes sense. And so I didn't want my area to end up like East Nashville and other parts of Nashville, where folks who've been there their whole lives, 50, 60 plus years, and they could no longer afford to live in the area. And so I felt like new leadership was needed to basically not stop development, because no one wants to stop development. I mean, we all like nice new things, but to cater it in such a way where we were still preserving our history and preserving our established neighborhoods while welcoming development, basically development on our own terms.
So tell me, and we'll get into the budget stuff in just a minute, but from your standpoint over the next, we've been in the council, we're starting year 2, 4-year term. What do you see particularly in your district in terms of development and ways that that you can sort of, you can preserve what the neighborhoods and everybody in the district wants, but you can allow for proper growth. And some people call it smart development, smart growth. What do you kind of see over the next 3 years maybe happening in your district?
So in District 2, we have our main corridors, which is Clarksville Highway, West Trinity Lane, Whites Creek Pike, Baptist World Center. And so there's a lot of empty land along those corridors, or maybe dilapidated properties. So there's an opportunity to concentrate the smart development along those corridors. So your neighborhoods are still intact. You know, the character of those neighborhoods remain intact, and all of that development, all of those rooftops that, you know, all of the experts say drive economic prosperity and bring in the amenities that people like to see, the retail, the sit down dining, the entertainment. So we get our rooftops by concentrating the development along the corridors, but then we also preserve our neighborhoods.
Okay. Well, you've got a big job ahead of you in your district. One of the things that I think I mentioned to you early on was particularly districts 1, 2, and 3. You know, there is land. With the city developing so fast, you do want to make sure that it's developed in the right way. So it sounds like you're doing exactly what I think we had talked about early on, and that is trying to figure out how to make all this stuff work together.
Yep. Yep.
All right. So let me switch over to why would I call you, make you become budget chair? So for most people who are watching, the budget chair position is one of the key positions on the city council, Metro Council. It is, particularly right now with everything going on, it's a very, very important position. You served as the vice chair under Council Member Bob Mendez, and he was the chair the first year. Obviously, again, for people who may not know this, I've known Councilmember Toombs, I've known Kyonzte for a number of years, almost 9 or 10 years, and think the world of her. She's steady, strong, can do this. And so the pick was, particularly after you serving as vice chair, to me was pretty obvious pick. So tell me a little bit, or tell the folks a little bit about what you did as vice chair to get ready for this year ahead of us, and then we'll talk about this year.
Mm-hmm. So while I served as vice chair, one thing that Councilman Mendez and I did, we did a series of community meetings. And so that was to educate people, the community at large, on the budget and where we were as a city financially. So I think that helped me as far as engaging with the public, getting to hear people's perspectives on the budget and what their concerns were. And it gave me it deepened my knowledge of the budget process and what the feelings were in the community. I think that Councilman Mendez is all things budget and finance. So just listening to him and asking questions and looking at how he does things. I mean, he was just an amazing teacher. Last year, I actually felt like I was part of the process, that I had a say in the process. Some of the amendment language in the substitute budget was my language. So I wasn't just, a figurehead. I was an active part of the process, and I learned a lot last year.
All right. So tell folks, because and now we'll get into some of the questions. Usually we pass our budget and then go on. That doesn't happen in this situation, particularly in the middle of a pandemic, and particularly with a 34% property tax increase. So I remember before the pandemic hit and everything kind of really came to if not a halt, everything slowed way down. You all were out there talking to people about the current budget situation, which was not all that great even before the pandemic hit. So why don't you kind of walk through what because people were going like, okay, so what was the discussion around the 32 initially from the mayor and then the 34%? What was, as you were looking at it, what was your kind of understanding of what was happening with that whole process?
So, like you said, we were not in a good financial position prior to the tornado and COVID. So part of our presentation was just explaining what our finances were looking like, because folks look at all the new tall and skinnies, the new office buildings, the new hotels, and they're like, Nashville is booming. Tourism, we're like a #1 tourist destination. Like, Nashville is booming. How can we be in a poor financial position? Well, if your revenues grow 29%, but your debt grows 32%, you're in a bad situation. And I believe our cash balance at that time, we had about three weeks worth of cash. So if everything came to a halt, we could survive for 3 weeks as a city. So going into the budget season, you're looking at, well, how can we put ourselves in a better cash position, in a better, our fund balances were very low. How can we put ourselves in a better position as a city? And from my perspective, looking at how poor our finances were at the time, I didn't see how you could get around a property tax increase. There had been a big reappraisal in 2017. There wasn't a rate increase at that time. And I think what people don't realize is that state law prohibits us from having a windfall from the property taxes of pre-existing properties. So whatever unless the council votes on a tax rate increase, whatever we collected last year has to be the same thing that we collect this year. So I believe in 2017, you had an average property value increase of about 35% or so. And so if you were in an area that increased higher than 35%, you saw your property tax bill go up. If you were at about 35%, it probably stayed about the same. If you were lower than 35%, your property tax bill probably went down. And it was just so that everything could balance out so that it equaled the prior year. So even as people's property values were increasing, we weren't necessarily seeing that increase in revenue as a city. So again, really not seeing, how you get around a property tax increase. And then you have COVID. And sales taxes we're anticipating as a result of COVID that our sales taxes are going to basically take a deep dive. And so how do we account for that? And I believe after the mayor's office and our finance department looked for savings, looked where they can cut things, we were still about $332 million in the hole. So how do you plug a hole that big? You have to raise the property taxes. And so that's where you got the dollar. Okay, and so after people got over the shock of a dollar tax increase, which is huge, they were like, well, there's nothing in this budget for neighborhoods. Like, it had cut longevity, it had cut metro raises. I think it pretty much kept schools flat. There really wasn't anything for people. And so then you have the substitute budget, which is $1.06. And at first glance, you're like, $1 is too high. $1.06 is insane. But when you're looking at the numbers, that's about an extra $20 million in revenue, that's 6 cents, an extra $20 million in revenue. And for that $20 million, I mean, we stretched that as far as you could stretch $20 million, as far as putting back the metro raises, giving money so that community centers can be open on Saturdays. And if you complain about knucklehead kids in your neighborhood, you want somewhere for them to go on Saturdays. It gave money for a chief diversity officer, because there's still disparity in African-American and minority-owned companies getting government contracts. And so that chief diversity officer is going to oversee that process and try to bring more equity to it. There was money given to nonprofits that do great social work in the communities. Because one thing, even if you're having financial problems as a city, our marginalized communities always suffer the worst. So you want to make sure that you're at least providing essential services to the residents of Nashville, so that they can, attempt to, live life as normally as possible. So those are just my thoughts around it. You couldn't get around a property tax increase. And if you're going to raise people's property taxes, at least give them something for it.
Well, so I would say that particularly going back to the dollar increase from the mayor, I always called it kind of a status quo.
Yeah.
In the sense that, and I think a lot of people, particularly during pandemic, it was hard to get that information out. You were involved in those discussions in the community before the pandemic hit about trying to explain it. Typically what happens is once we get the budget from the mayor, we have lots of hearings, and we did have hearings, but it was much more difficult to get information out because people were trying to deal with a whole nother situation going on out there. So the dollar from the mayor was more of a hold it all together. It wasn't, there wasn't a lot of stuff out there that was coming in with that dollar. It was just basically, we're going to keep everything level. The council added some stuff. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough to, I think some of it was trying to get people's wages up, at least I know with education, up to a livable wage. So it wasn't, it was just helping people along. The not-for-profits, I think, as I remember, some of them have been in the budget for a while and provide because the government can't provide every service. A lot of
Right.
these not-for-profits receive money for various reasons because they provide a service that maybe government doesn't have. And they had been cut initially, as I remember, in the mayor's budget. And some of this extra money went to get them back to where they were so they could continue to keep functioning. Overall, obviously, it was not an easy vote. I would say, because I've had to make those votes before, you know, sometimes you just, in order to keep the city functioning, you do what you need to do. Tell me, just let people know, I mean, obviously you were hearing up until the bill passed, the budget passed, and then even after, you've heard from people in your district.
Mm-hmm.
Do people generally understand what was going on? Is there, I know there's information out there and there's sometimes misinformation out there. What are you basically hearing still about the passage of the budget?
Mm-hmm. So from the perspective of my district, obviously you're going to have some folks who just think the property tax increase is outrageous and should not have happened. I think that the majority of folks that I hear from, they don't like it, but they understand it. They understand that we need to be able to pay for city services and be able to keep the city going. So they're okay with it in that respect. I think that there's still a misunderstanding of how the budget works. There's still a call for making deep cuts. And we've been asking departments to cut pretty much every year for the past several years. So a lot of them are already to the bone. If not all of them are to the bone. Not to say that you don't keep an open mind and constantly look for efficiencies and how you can do things better for less. But we have been cutting as a city, and I don't think that that gets across. I just think that people, you know, they see a property tax increase and it's large, and perhaps they weren't paying attention to the budget process prior to seeing that headline, 34% property tax increase. And now they're like, hey, you know, what's been going on? And so they're not privy to how we got here.
Well, so let's, because some of the questions revolve around that. It was, one of the questions was there any alternative to the 34% increase? Initially 32% from the mayor. Any alternatives that were being discussed in that process? Were there different ways of setting up the tax rate? The question just came in about why didn't you just tax some people some rate and some people in corporations a different rate? How do you do that? Alternatives, what was being discussed? And was there really any clear-cut alternative as everybody looked at it?
So there's already a different tax rate for commercial properties. They're taxed at 40% of the assessed tax value, and then residential is 25%. So we already tax commercial properties differently. I think that I don't think there were any alternatives to a property tax increase. Were there any alternatives to the amount? I mean, I think that's relative. It depends on who you're talking to. Even folks, you know, with finance backgrounds could look at our budget and come to different opinions, just like any other professional. I mean, we cut MTA by $22 million. That's because they got CARES Act funding, but that's one-time funding. So next year, we're going to have to put that $22 million back. So we're starting 22 million, you know, in the hole, even for next year. We did targeted savings. And when you hear targeted savings, that means that, you know, any open positions, they like departments don't fill those positions. So they keep those positions open. We did a hiring freeze. We did travel freeze. We cut everything possible. And that ended up being, I don't know, probably like about $40 or $50 million in cuts. And then we did, you know, look for other savings, which basically means, you know, if they're capital projects like sidewalks, you know, infrastructure repairs, not doing them because we didn't have the money basically. And so that creates a savings. So I think that recalling the budget presentation, we were really like 500 million in the hole. But then after the cuts and the savings, we trimmed it down to 332 million. So that's after we've looked under every rock. It's still 332 million. So there weren't many alternatives after that.
Well, so let me ask you this, because I still get emails, and I assume you do too, from people who said, well, why didn't you just cut into Metro government? So understanding that the budget basically, as presented from the mayor, and then ended up being adopted by the council with some changes. But again, that status quo, which meant we're just going to hold it together. I think some people would say, well, you could have just cut into government. You know, there were other people who got laid off from work. Why didn't you cut into government? How do you explain that to people? How do you explain that to people? I know how I do it, but I'll throw it to you. How do you explain when people come up and go, why didn't you just cut into government?
So government has to work. It has to survive. We have to be able to provide city services. I know for my district, the request for services has increased. I've never had a conversation with a constituent who had an issue and said, well, I know, we don't have as much money for a city. We don't have as much money as a city, so you don't have to worry about my request. No, they want their request fulfilled today, yesterday, really.
Yeah,
So
right.
the request for city services is still there and has not decreased. So we need to have the resources to keep the city going, to respond to the needs of our residents. So yes, we can cut some things, but we can't cut so deeply that we can't function.
Well, so, and the way I typically explain it is, all right, so we had a number of people out of work, and I know how bad that was, and that's costing money someplace through government, whether it's city, state, or federal. The cuts would have been for $330 million worth of cuts. You're talking about just wiping out some whole departments at that point. Yeah. Basically because, again, the overall budget, which is over $2 billion, a giant chunk of that goes to education.
Yep.
And so we're just not going to have teachers. I mean, what are we going to cut in there? And you really, I'm not even sure legally you can cut into the education. So then what you're looking at, police, fire department, and then you start getting into a lot smaller departments like general services or public works, picking up trash and things like that. And I think the idea is that when people say, why didn't you just cut into stuff? I think you're right from the standpoint of when you start making such drastic cuts, you're going to just wipe out services for a while. And then you've got constituents that are going like, how come my garbage didn't get picked up?
Right.
Basic city services. And I think one of the problems during a pandemic is obviously trying to explain this to people and understand, like you said, that the initial cuts were, or the initial deficit was around 500 million, and they had to find ways to get that pared back down and do it. So anyway, one of the questions that somebody asked was the complexity of government and the accounting of it. So tell me this, I mean, again, who knows what's going to happen with the pandemic, over the next 2 months or 6 months or whatever, how long this is going to be. You start as budget chair. How are you going to try to explain what's going on now? And then we're going to get into the referendum, which is also now on everybody's mind. But how do you explain to people from your standpoint and during a pandemic, the complexities of government right now?
So that's what we tried to do last year with the community meetings, and we did 6 of them and went around the county having these meetings, and the last one, because of COVID, ended up being virtual. I think that, we have to do a continuation of that, and that's my part of my plan as budget chair is to continue those community conversations and to start them now, today, with you, and to start those conversations early, get a feel for what questions folks continue to have, and just make it as plain as possible to educate folks on how the budget works, how the process works, how we spend our money. All of this information is actually available online, but if you go to our budget website, I mean, it's not user friendly. It's a bunch of charts, a bunch of numbers. So if you don't have a finance background or accounting background, you may not understand what you're looking at. So my goal is, as budget chair, is to basically break that information down in a way that people can understand it and feel a part of the process and feel knowledgeable about the process.
Okay. All right. So let's switch over to the referendum that's coming up. So, so what we've got, and I'll try to lay it out the best way I can, and then correct me if I make mistakes on it. We have a citizen-driven petition. That's one of the ways to amend the charter, which does a number of different things. It's been filed, and the number of signatures has been confirmed. That will basically roll back the 34% tax increase, put caps on it in the future. You can't increase tax rates more than 2% unless you have a referendum. And it also gets into bonding. So if the city wants to sell bonds for a particular project, I think it's $15 million. I think that's the number. That after, if you go anything higher than that, then you have to have a referendum. There's a number of different things in there. I know it went to the election commission yesterday they met an executive committee, which meant that it was not open to the public. And then I think they're going to vote maybe next Friday as to whether, based upon some of the legal arguments being thrown around, whether to put it on the ballot. It was scheduled, I think the referendum said December the 5th, which is actually a Saturday. So the question will be, will it go on the ballot? What day will it be? That type of thing. Tell me your initial thoughts about this this referendum. How do you see this? What do you know about it? And then we'll get into more of the impact depending on what happens with it. Okay.
So my initial thoughts are, one, since I'm an attorney, the legality of it, of retroactively repealing a property tax increase that's already passed. That would be extremely punitive on the city. There's already state laws in place, delegating to the local government authority the authority to tax property. There's also already a cap in the charter as far as how, I think charter or an ordinance, as far as how the limit on what we can assess on property. I think that's $4.79, and we are under that. So my initial thought, obviously being an attorney, like I said, is looking at the legalities of it. Then you're looking at what's the practical implications of it. Putting a cap on the bond issues to 15 million, we would probably have to have a special election every year to get anything done in the city. I mean, we're hundreds of millions of dollars behind in sidewalk infrastructure. So we wouldn't be able to make any meaningful improvements or advancements in that area without having a special election. A 2% cap on property tax rate. I mean, that's barely inflation if it even is, and that wouldn't help us as far as being able to provide city services to citizens or to residents. I think it would just throw us in an upheaval, because then we're also looking at, right now, we're dealing with a $332 million deficit. So what do we cut? And like you said earlier, we're looking at cutting police, we're looking at cutting fire. And I know folks think that's a scare tactic, but it's the truth. Our smaller departments, a lot of them, their total budget is not going to equal up to $332 million. So you can't really say, well, get rid of such and such department. We're trying to make up $332 million. So we're having to look at those big budget departments like MNPD. We're having to look at education. And, from a budget perspective, we are required to fund schools at the whatever amount we funded them in the previous year. So you're looking at roughly $1 billion off top. However, your budget is kind of like your aspirations. Like your budget is based off the revenue that you anticipate coming in. But if that revenue doesn't come in and you don't have the cash to actually fulfill that budget item, it is what it is. Like you don't have the actual money. Cash is king. Like you have to have the actual money to pay your bills. And if that money doesn't come in, if we're looking at a drop of $332 million in revenue, I mean, there's no way to avoid drastic changes that most people will not like.
Okay. Do you see it? I'll ask you this, and then I'll answer it myself. But do you see it as part of your responsibility as the budget chair of the Metro Council to make sure that the city properly functions?
Yes. So obviously, your finance director determines how much money we have as a city. Once that number is set, that's what we have to work with. Obviously, the mayor as the CEO of the city, leads policy and is the first person to have a bite at the apple during the budget process. He presents his budget first. I think that as budget and finance chair, I'm still just one vote out of 40 on the council. However, I think that in this leadership role, I facilitate the conversation, to make sure everyone's on the same page, that people understand the budget, how it works, that people understand what the realities are that we face, and that people understand what the options are. And so I facilitate that conversation. And my goal in facilitating those conversations is to make sure we are on solid financial footing as a city.
Okay. Well, I was going to say that as the vice mayor and as the person that picked you or strong-armed you to make sure that you took this position, yeah, I think it's the responsibility of the entire city council. That's what people got elected to, was to make this city better, but to make sure that it runs correctly and effectively. And there's responsibility that goes behind it. That's why people run for office. That's what happens in this country. And it's the responsibility of the council, along working with the mayor and the finance director, to make sure that this city runs properly. One of the things I'll go back to, and then got a couple more questions on this area, is particularly when I asked you the question about alternatives, the only real other alternative that, and people didn't spend a lot of time there because I didn't think I believe people probably thought it really wasn't a true alternative, was just to cut deeply into metro government. And I heard everything from, at that point, that I mean, basically you were gutting the city, and that we would be in big trouble if that's what we did. And I think you're right from the standpoint that if you really can't touch education, where do you go? And do people really, I mean, the big departments, the big money is, a lot of it's in the police department, a lot of it's in the fire department. That's all about trying to keep people safe. And I'll ask you a question about the fund the police thing in just a second. But I mean, responsibilities, people go look at what the responsibilities of city government are. And I've always kind of in my own mind thought it was twofold. One was education and the other one was public safety, which to some extent also includes, at this point, public health, because of the nature of what we're going through right now. I mean, one of the things that I might go back and do is to go look at the budget and look at the other departments, because people go, well, maybe you could just cut into the parks department. But the parks department budget, as you were saying, a lot of these small departments, they're not even near, $330 million. They're not even close to $50 million if they're that high. Right. Some of them are a lot smaller than that. So there's an old discussion, Kyonzte, that goes back. This was before you're on the council. You've only been on there 1 year and already you're tasked with this. So people can get mad at me because I've been on the council before, and and people have blamed the past councils, and we have to take up our share of responsibilities. But we tried 1 year to actually bring people together to try to figure out some ways to generate some savings. I think at that point we were looking for like $70 million, $50 million, not $330 million, but we were looking for something to cut. And as soon as you start putting stuff on the table, people start saying, you can't do that. And so I will tell you that we were all supposed to come together and bring suggested cuts. One of mine was to cut 1% across the board. Another one was cut like 2% across the board. And I had the police and fire department in at that time. And people yelled at me and said, you can't cut fire and police. And it's like, well, but that's where a lot of the money is. If you really want to put cuts on the table, you've got to put everything on. And people said no. And it's like, okay, I understand. I don't necessarily want to do it either, but you got to lay it all out. So I'm not sure people fully understand when you're talking about $330 million worth of cuts, what you're talking about doing to a city and its ability to function. But I think that's what part of this discussion is going to have to be as we get more towards the referendum. Okay, so going back to something that happened during these discussions, and that was the defund the police discussion. Tell me a little bit about what you heard and kind of your thoughts on the overall process as well.
So this past budget season, probably maybe, I believe council had already received the budget. So probably a month to 2 weeks before we were actually going to vote on the budget, there was a huge community driven push to defund the police. And that means different things for different folks. For some folks, it means reallocating resources because there are some police duties that perhaps are better suited for other entities to do, like responding to mental health calls, serving as school resource officers in schools. So taking those resources and giving them to departments or organizations that are better suited for those duties. And then for some folks, it's doing away with the police, it's abolition of the police. So the community push this past budget season was to cut $100 million from the police budget. The police budget is about $209 million. So basically cutting it in half. And I'll say that once the council gets the budget from the mayor, it is very difficult to change it. What you're looking at when it gets to council is that to take from to give to one department, you got to take from another. And there's not many opportunities, if any, to make drastic changes. Because you look at the substitute budget that ended up passing, that was an extra $20 million. So you're not looking at huge changes. So because of that, it was very difficult to move on something like that, to cut a department so drastically towards the end of the budget process and not know what the implications of that would be. Like, what does that mean for the city? So I think that's why it's so important to have these discussions early. That's why I'm starting now, because I think that's an important discussion to have. I mean, there's a huge movement in Nashville as well as across the country regarding the relationship between police and the community and the role that police officers play. I think most people would say they want police officers to do police work. They want them to catch the robbers, catch the murderers, the rapists, things like that. When people think about mental health services, they don't think of police, but in most instances, that's your only option, to call the police. I think most people would prefer if a mental health team came out. I think that most people would prefer that instead of having an armed police officer in schools, that there were, more social workers, more people trained in social emotional learning. So I definitely think that it's a conversation that needs to be had, and we need to move towards reallocating those resources and let police do police work, and then let the experts do those other things. And so that's part of the reason that I want to start these conversations early, so that we can really have a serious conversation and figure out what that looks like.
And I think obviously that I think that's a good idea and a good way to move forward. We've had the sheriff on the call, on the Zoom call. He talked about what they're doing with the jails, particularly with mental health, and he was particularly citing the number of people. It's like a revolving door of people who have mental health issues who are arrested on Monday, and then they come back through Wednesday, and then come back on Friday. Yeah. And trying to divert them out of the system and
Yep.
get them the necessary help that they need so that they get out of this, again, revolving door of being incarcerated. Also heard the arguments about giving out citations and other things. You want the police doing police work, and how do you make that work better? Yeah, I think there's a lot of discussions that can be had on that issue, and so I'm glad you're going to have discussions on that. All right, so we've got we've got just about 10 minutes left. So obviously you've been budget chair for all of 2 meetings so far, all right? And so far you're doing great, okay? When I call on you, you're ready with the announcements, and I think that's wonderful. And I'm giving Kyonzte a hard time, but it's there's a lot to juggle with just chairing the meetings, particularly virtually. And the council, some of you may know, we are bringing people back together. The first meeting in October, which will be the next meeting, October the 6th, we will actually be, I think that's the right date. We will be bringing people back into the Music City Center, because the chamber, the way the chamber is set up is that we have some plexiglass in there, but it's just not, really difficult to keep everybody 6 feet apart and everybody can wear masks. So we're working on that, but we'll be at the Music City Center. So bringing people back in. So it's kind of like, okay, we're going to get to see each other again, and maybe we start working together again. What do you see as your role as budget chair? What do you want to accomplish? You've talking about the, the funding of the police and the reallocation, that type of stuff. What are your goals for this year? What do you see as things that you want to accomplish in the next basically 11 and some change months left ahead?
So having that community education piece, making the process as transparent as possible so that folks feel like they know what's going on, that they understand it, they feel like they have a say in the process. I would like to see, I don't know what's going to happen if we're dealing with a $332 million hole, but barring that, I would like to see more money going towards schools. I think that that's part of the discussion in reallocating resources from the police department. I think we need to take a serious look at that. Like school resource officers, is that money better used in the schools for, social work or social emotional learning training and resources? So I really want to take a serious look at every single budget with every single department, see where resources can be reallocated, because I would like to see more go to schools. I was in a meeting with Representative Vincent Dixie, and it was a meeting about school funding. And he said, because, there's a lot of criticism of public schools. They get all this money and, our schools are still failing, but they've never been appropriately funded. Yes, they do get a large chunk of money, but it's never all the money that they've asked for. And so he said, what if we gave them the money that they asked for 3 years straight and just see what happens? If for once they are funded the way they need to be, let's just see what happens. And so I would like to move the needle towards that. We still don't have the best finances as a city. So perhaps we can't, give them all the money that they need, but if we can just start increasing that amount to get them to where they need to be, I would be a happy person and a happy council member. So that's my community education, increasing transparency, hopefully putting more money towards schools, and also having serious conversation and actually acting upon reallocating resources to more appropriate entities and departments.
All right. So your relationship with the mayor and the finance director who's on the call, good working relationship so far?
Yeah, we are working well together so far. So far, so good.
All right. And relationships with the budget committee. I know that it's hard piecing this together. Obviously, it's been really interesting over the last 6-7 months trying to do all this stuff virtually. And I know I haven't seen some council members in 6 or 7 months physically. I mean, I've seen them on camera. Mm-hmm. But do you expect any problems, any holdups once you start bringing people back together?
I mean, obviously folks have, different ideologies, different opinions about different things. So, everyone is not going to see the budget the way that I see it, or see the city's finances the way that I see them. So again, that goes with fostering those, facilitating those conversations, and hoping to come to some type of consensus on what our priorities should be. And I hope that those priorities align with what my priorities are. And so, that's part of my job as budget chair, to try to guide those conversations. So, looking forward to the next, 11 and a half months, and having those conversations and steering the city towards, more sound financial footing, and reaching those goals that I've set out for the year.
All right. So, and I think this may be, this is about our last question. I guess, I do have a question about general services and urban services. Anything you can tell us about that, the difference? We've had that question before, just the difference, the distinction between the two.
So the entire county is the general services district. And then you have a portion of the county that's the urban services district. So the bulk of your property tax rate is in the general services district, and the urban services district is about 40 cents, and that covers trash pickup and some other little odds and ends. Get a lot of complaints from general services folks who think, well, I'm not getting the services that the urban services district gets, so why am I paying, this much in property taxes? But it's really minimal, the difference between general services and urban services. So it's not a significant difference.
All right. So this is my last question to you. So particularly from where we are, and I know I do the same thing, but state and federal assistance or help, what do you watch for in that? This is whether, I know there's been some recent discussions from the state standpoint, but the federal government was looking at maybe providing some additional help. We don't know where that will go, but how do you kind of keep up with all this information? Because depending on whether we get some relief from a federal government act or not, may have some impact on what we do eventually through this year and what the tax rate may eventually become.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What do you keep up with? How do you keep all your information together? How do you make sure that you keep it all in some place where you can get it and store it, so that when I ask you these questions, you actually know what I'm talking about?
Well, I definitely keep up with what the conversations are on the different levels of government in regard to federal financial assistance, because that does impact what we do. I mean, everybody knows that we got the $121 million in CARES Act funds, and we've pretty much just about gone through that money. We've got about 27 million left. And there's still so much more that needs to be done in terms of providing relief to residents. So we definitely need more money. So it's imperative to keep up with those conversations and keep up with how it could potentially impact our city. But I'm sure our finance director would agree, even with those conversations, until we get an actual check, it doesn't change what we do on the city level, because we need the cash to pay our bills. So the discussions are fine, but we need to see the actual money.
Money, I get it. Spoken as a true budget chair. Kyonzte Toombs, council member from District 2, our budget chair this year. Thanks for being on today. Really interesting discussion. I very much appreciate your comments and what you're doing. And I'm so thankful that you agreed to do that this year. When I called you, it was like, I don't know if I would do it, but thank you for agreeing to be budget chair. It's going to be a tough year, just like this last one was, but we're very glad that you agreed to do it. So thank you. Thank you for being on. I will tell you a couple of things. Tom Druffel will be our guest next week. He's the chair of the Education Committee. So one of the things that we're doing, as people who watch this Zoom call, if they've been on a frequent basis, all of a sudden they're going to start seeing the chairs of the committees. The new chairs are going to be on the show. And we're doing that so for a couple reasons. One is so that everybody can get to know the chairs and get to know kind of what they do as chairs. Some chairs are have much more legislation. Budget always has tons of stuff coming through. And so their meetings usually last an hour and a half, 2 hours. Sometimes they last 3 or 4 hours, sort of like the council meeting. But so we're going to be bringing the chairs on just to talk. And so you can get to know them and get to know kind of what their thoughts are on different things. So Tom Druff will be on next week, Chairman of Education. We've been working on the schedule for the rest of this year. We have some surprises in store. So just keep watching and we'll let you know. And I guess the last thing I will tell you is, Kyonzte, good luck with those kids, particularly late at night on those council meeting nights. And I'm sure we'll know more about everybody going back to school probably soon. I know that Dr. Battle's working on that. And we may have her on at some point because probably get an update on what's happening with all the schools and how that's going. Anyway, have a good rest of the weekend. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Be safe, everybody. And hopefully we'll see everybody next week. Thanks, Councilmember Toombs. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me, Vice Mayor.
All right. Thanks. Have a good one.